Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Elizabeth Chiles Shelburne. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Erin, for having me. I'm super excited to be on.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. Really quickly, a little bit about Elizabeth Chiles Shelburne. She grew up reading, writing, and shooting in East Tennessee. After graduating from Amherst College, she became a writer and staff editor at the Atlantic Monthly. Her first novel is Holding On to Nothing. So let's just start with this really exciting book. Tell me about Holding On to Nothing.
So I've been sort of describing it as almost like an Appalachian ballad come to life in modern day Tennessee. So it's about, it's set in rural East Tennessee. It's about Lucy Kilgore, who has her bags packed, ready to leave her hometown, when a drunken mistake one night tethers her to the town and to the notorious Jeptha Taylor, who becomes the father of her child and also the source of love and sorrow. And it's really a story about sort of love, liquor, music, sorrow, and redemption.
Oh, fantastic. And so much richness. It's like, it's sort of like the one choice, or the life plans, right, that just get turned awry and all the choices we have to make along the way. It sounds like that was a pretty fantastic journey just to sort of see how it all came together, see where it all went.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, I've been working on this book for a more longer than I like to talk about in polite company, and so it's been fun and I've taken lots of breaks along the way, and it's been really fun to kind of continue to always just keep coming back to these characters. I really love them, and really love this story, even though there's definitely some sadness and sorrow in it. But I really just was, I love these two, and I love the small town that grew up around them, and the sort of all the side characters. I thought that was so much fun to kind of keep delving into them. And that's the way it really is in small towns. There's always someone you go to Walmart or you go to church or whatever it is, and there's always someone who knows you and knows your business and knows your reputation, whether you deserve it or not. And so that was sort of a lot of what I wanted to explore.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. And so in your bio and kind of just there, you talk about growing up in East Tennessee. And so tell me, are there some details from your childhood that worked their way into the novel?
There definitely are. So when I was in college, I was home helping my parents. They had bought a log cabin that they were going to take down and put back together. And move over to our farm. And so, and they're really like Lincoln logs. You can take them apart and put them back together. So I was helping my dad take some pictures of this log cabin, and this car drives by once and then drives by twice and then drives by a third time and finally stops. And this guy gets out, and he's in his 40s or 50s, but he still saunters over. He walks his way over, and he's like, "That's a fine looking vehicle. You're a fine looking woman." And I was like, "Oh my God. What's happening here?" And so he allows he has a barn up at his place, and would I want to come take some pictures of that? And I politely declined, in the same breath as I mentioned that my father was a lawyer in town, and maybe he knew him. And he got in the car pretty quick after that, but his name was Jeptha. And so, a name I hadn't actually heard before. I'd heard sort of variations of it, but I hadn't heard that one before. And I just love that name, and I love that he was in his 50s and still sauntering. And I kind of wondered what he would be like as what he might have been like, what that he would be like as a character in his 20s. So that's kind of where Jeptha grew up from, and so that was very much a home experience informing the book. And then in terms of the other stuff, I grew up as a hunter in a family that always hunted. Actually became a feminist because my brothers told me I couldn't and wouldn't go hunting, and I was pretty determined to prove them wrong about that. And then I'm trying to think of some other things. There's one story. My dad was a small town lawyer, so hang up a shingle, take whatever comes in the door kind of lawyer. And who used to sometimes get paid in moonshine. We'd keep it in the pantry in a bottle of wild turkey, but he'd written an ER after it, so it was wilder turkey.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yeah, so he had a client once, or I can't remember if his client or someone else was in town, but who had actually gotten arrested for DUI, And when the cop got over to his car, he had a like 500-pound pot-bellied pig in his passenger seat, and he was just drunk as a skunk. And he said, "Wasn't me, officer. It was my pig." And I just like, always laugh so much of that story. And so I put that little tiny detail in the book, in a sort of, you know, in a moment that's actually kind of sad, because it's talking about how Lucy lost her parents. But I love that too, because there's a lot of, I think, just life in general, and where I grew up, there's a lot of kind of sorrow that goes hand in hand with something funny. And so I felt that was kind of a good moment of that, of illustrating that, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And like, they do go hand in hand, right? You know, that like, telling the story of your father as a small town lawyer, I imagine there was a lot of privilege in being able to hold people's darkest moments and try and help them through it, but also a lot of sorrow in like seeing those dark moments and seeing that, right? And even, yes, like, yeah, like both of those things, kind of the sorrow and the humor hand in hand. And so tell me a little bit more about then those characters. So you've got characters also probably sorrow and humor hand in hand, right, from the outset. So how did you work with your characters, and how did you make decisions about the path they were going to follow and the mistakes they were going to make or not make? Like, tell me a little bit more about that writing process with those characters.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to tell you that I am a super organized person who lays out an outline and, you know, really, like we say, writers say, plotters, someone who really has a plan in place. I am the exact opposite. I am definitely a pantser, so I write by the seat of my pants. And so for me, it's really all about characters and what really trying to get in the heads of what they would do in any given moment. Jeptha is, unfortunately, you know, he's an alcoholic, and he's never really had a good role model for how to be what he calls a good man. You know, there are often times, especially when it comes to Lucy and their son Jared, that he'd really like to be, and he just doesn't know how. So I think for thinking about decisions for him, it was always sort of thinking about what would Jeptha do when he was, you know, in love so much, but also just not able to kind of get to the other side of making the good choice and doing the right thing. And for Lucy, she just keeps wanting to sort of get out, and she's feeling so kind of stuck in her circumstances. But also she's a person who's always going to try to make the best of whatever it is she's doing. And she's going to really try to do everything she can. She's such a hard worker. Like, she just is going to try so hard and bring some of that kind of optimism, sort of scarred optimism, to life. And so I think for her, it was always thinking about what would she do, because she's a very loyal person. So how would she sort of be loyal to the choices she's already made, but always keep trying to move forward and make a better life for herself. So I was really driven by those two things and thinking about these two characters.
Oh, fantastic. And like, just listening to you talk about those characters, like, I can just feel how much love you have for those two folks, right? Like, just in the tone of your voice. And so maybe it's not planned, but they're definitely well loved. So kudos to that.
They are definitely well loved. It's true. Like I say, I've been loving on them for a long time now.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. So great. And it sounds like also you have been like a reader and a writer for a really long time. So tell me more. What do you love about reading and writing?
I think it's just reading has always been my happy place. You know, and growing up, there wasn't sort of such an amazing plethora of YA literature like there is now. So sort of my first library and bookshop was my dad's and mom's, you know, bookshelf, so we could just kind of grab anything we wanted. And so as a result, I read To Kill a Mockingbird when I was 7, so I didn't understand anything about what was going on.
Right, but like Scout in that book is like also about that age, right? So like, you know, yes. I mean, there was probably a lot that you picked up that maybe more than you give yourself credit for.
It's possible. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. I think I probably really related to her and what she was going through. And it's true that she doesn't fully understand everything that's going on in that book either, you know? So in that sense, it was a good thing. So that was always the place I wanted to be, was reading. I like grew up, loved, you know, the little House on the Prairie books and the Narnia books. And so I was just sort of always happy to be doing that. And I was always writing. My mom was a writer. She wrote a column for our town newspaper. So that was always an amazing role model for that. And so I think I wrote my first book when I was 7. with a friend of mine. Yes, there's definitely a lot of writers have that story of their first book.
Sure.
And mine was on homophones, which are words that mean something different, and they're spelled differently, but they're pronounced the same. I wrote it with a friend of mine named Susan, and we with this great illustration. This is the only one I remember, but it was a steak, like the meat, jabbed onto a stake, like you'd use to kill a vampire.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I love that, like, at 7, you were already playing with words, right? Because homophones, like, those are actually really trippy for 7-year-olds. They're like, wait, like, it almost doesn't make sense. Like, how can it sound the same but be spelled differently? Like, and the fact that you got that and, like, we're playing with that, like, oh my gosh, I love it. That's delightful.
Well, thank you. I love it. It's funny. That was one of the sort of few things from my childhood that my parents had saved. They unfortunately had a fire 6 years ago, and it was one of the things that burned in the fire, unfortunately, because it was really like this lovely book, but it's a thing, so we move on.
Oh, well, its memory lives on, like a steak with a
exactly. Steak
so
on a
good.
steak.
Yeah, oh my gosh, fantastic. Well, my last question as we kind of close our interview, I would love to just hear a little bit more about, as Holding On to Nothing comes into the world, like, what conversations are you hoping to have with readers? Like, what ideas do you hope this brings up? What questions do you think that it has? And what are you hoping to talk about, having worked on something on your own for so long and now bringing it into the world?
It's such a good question, and the bringing it into the world part it's funny. It's more nerve-wracking than I had expected it would be.
Sure.
You work on something for a long time, kind of quietly, and here, now everyone's kind of it's out there, and it's now seeing it out there in places where I didn't have anything to do with getting it out there. It's some random person has it, but it's been really awesome, and the reception has been really nice. And I think it's hard. I mean, I think what I would most want people to think about are probably, one, thinking about like stories of Appalachia. I really started writing this book because I didn't ever feel like I was seeing kind of accurate depictions of where I'd grown up in the news media. And I think sometimes fiction tells those stories better than journalism does. And I say that as a former and sometimes still journalist. So I'm certainly not knocking journalism at all, but I think sometimes fiction really can create some empathy in places where you might not have it if you just read a news story. So I was hoping that that's something that people would relate to and want to know more about. So I think there's a lot of really incredible Appalachian writers right now, like Silas House and Robert Geip, Crystal Wilkinson, that are just doing amazing writing. And so I'd love if people were like, read this book and said, oh, I want to make sure I read that, this other one. I want to know more about that. I think that would be really exciting for me to think that, it was sort of part of that conversation about Appalachia.
Oh, fabulous. So great. And I think you're exactly right that there is something about fiction where it really allows you to sort of like put on the skin of somebody else in a way. You're right that facts sometimes don't do it. And, and you can kind of slow down because we are more than a compilation of the facts. It's also the emotions and the history and, kind of everything we bring with us along the way. And so one mistake is not just one mistake. It's sort of like one mistake that culminates in everything that came before. And so I think that fiction does a really fantastic job of getting into some of those nuances. So really, really good.
I think that's right. I once heard Admiral Jim Stavridis, who was like under consideration to be Hillary Clinton's VP and was head of CENTCOM and NATO High Command and just this really incredible Army figure. And he said that it was at this presentation, he said, what's the best way to create empathy? And his next slide was read books, read fiction. And it was just all, the sympathizers and other books from other places. I mean, I just love that. It was to me, sort of a little bit of a surprise to hear this man who, maybe would be focused on kind of military strategy and whatever, say the best thing to do to figure out the world and to learn about it is to read fiction from that place. And I thought that was awesome. It's a nice reminder.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And a perfect place to close. So thank you. Thank you for telling some of those stories of Appalachia, for being that voice of fiction, and for sharing those stories with us. I'm so grateful to get to be one of your readers. So thank you. Oh. Thank you so much for speaking with me and for writing Holding On to Nothing.
Thank you so much. This has been it's just been so much fun. Thank you.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you.